Welcome everyone to the latest Zoom event from Leeds Theosophical Society. We've been doing these now for almost 4 years, and we pride ourselves on having a great diversity of different people coming to talk to us and everything. This afternoon we welcome Susan Leybourne, a very long-standing member of the Theosophical Society and a former president of Leeds Theosophical Society in the past. Susan is currently studying for a PhD, and she has interests in numerous different areas of esotericism, and I hope that we'll be able to cover some of them this afternoon. So welcome, Susan. If I could just ask people to mute themselves if they haven't. So let's begin at the beginning, Susan. When did you first start becoming interested in things that were, shall we say, beyond the normal? Unusual, mysterious things, esotericism, and that sort of thing. Is that something that goes back?
It does. It goes back. It goes back right to the beginning, where as soon as I could think, I thought about the universe. I thought about God. I thought, why are we here? What did that dream mean? Is there another world? Is there another reality? And I started to study when I was about 5, because my mum and dad took me to the local library just to pick out something stabilising, come away with Janet and John or Baba the Elephant or something. And I came away with a book on the history of astrology. So that was the beginning, because even though I was 5, it took me a long time to read that book because I was adamant. My mum said, "You won't understand it. It's too old for you." And of course, it was too old for me, but I was adamant. And each book that I got from the library, I kept thinking there will be something in this book that will tell me about my own experiences, about my own beliefs, about my own thoughts and understandings of the world. And of course there never isn't there? You kind of study and it kind of gives you a little piece and another piece and another piece. And that was my kind of introduction to, kind of spiritual texts and spiritual information, esoteric information, which covered many religions. So, whatever appealed to me, I would just, kind of take the library book and work through it.
And did you have experiences as a young child or as you were growing up later as a teenager, which confirmed the sort of things you were trying to ask yourself and presented another world to you in forms of dreams or in other experiences?
Yes, I had a lot of psychic experiences, things that my mum and dad couldn't explain and didn't want to explain because it was just too beyond them, and they were just ordinary working class people. And everything that I've come down from, from having woken up and gotten up and said, "Oh, I had this amazing dream," or I had this vision, because I even had visions as a small child, and it was kind of, oh God, what's happening next, So, it was quite distressing to them, It's like, what can we do with this strange weirdo? What can we do with her? So I was quite, a kind of isolated child. I was, an only child. So I looked a lot at kind of reading books as a way into another reality, a comforting reality, to be honest. So that was my experience. But yes, I had psychic experiences, things that I would say that came true and things like that. And I started to sort of develop in that way. And I wanted to know more. I wanted to know much more about it. How do you control it? What are some methods? Things like that.
And when you reached adulthood, did you have experiences? Did you meet people? Did you come across information, organizations which suddenly attracted you and helped you to move further on down this path?
Well, I was part of several groups, kind of esoteric groups, magical groups. But I also used to go to a thing called a positive living group. and that was very superficial, to be truthful. It was only at one level, and I'd had a really really interesting mentor who I worked with for 15 years, who was a very high adept in Neoplatonism and philosophy and mysticism and Kabbalah and Hermetics, and I remember he had certain theosophical books and things like that. But we never really discussed, Madame Blavatsky said this, or Alice Bailey said that. I remember he had a big collection of Alice Bailey. And I thought, well, because he was a very elderly man, thought when Richard is gone, what will I do? And I was going to these kind of positive living groups and things and various other discussion groups and not really finding people at the right level and that seemed kind of sort of disappointing. And then I met someone who said, you really ought to go to the Theosophical Society. But that was the end of the meeting, and they were getting their coats, and I had to run for a bus, and it was a man and his wife, and I thought, right, I'll ask him next time where it is. And all I knew is it's near the Merrion Centre. That's all I knew. And so I set about trying to find this Theosophical building in Leeds, and I couldn't find it. And I searched for about 6 months to find it, until one day I was coming out of W.H. Smith's, and this man and his wife, they were passing by again. So I grabbed them and found out, oh, right, okay, that meeting you were telling me about, where is it? And he told me exactly where it is and where to go to. For the first time, I found that I was listening to people talking at a similar level to my own mentor. The first lecture I listened to, it was a lady who had come from London, and she spoke on, is spiritual practice harmful? I've never heard someone mention this in a talk at all. It's like, oh, do this, do that. But this lady, she gave a really academic talk on the dangers of spiritual unfoldment. And I thought, this is quite interesting. So I started to go regularly to the meetings. So I've always enjoyed, kind of theosophical discussion, and not necessarily as a hardline theosophist, but as someone who is interested in different belief systems and comparative religion. So that was my kind of early fumblings into groups and things.
Now, one of the things that's interested me about you is at some point in your career, you were a chaplain to one of the universities, I believe.
Yes, it was kind of strange, but because I've been working in America and I've been ordained as a reverend in a particular church, it was kind of kind of multi-faith, kind of church that you could be anything or nothing, and you had to write all these essays. I remember having to write 20 essays on different aspects of philosophy and different aspects of ethics and a whole variety of things, even things like the virgin birth and what do you think about it. So, and at the end of that, I got my kind of ordination certificate. And I came back and I remember being at a party in York, and there was a very loudmouth American man, and he said, well, you've got this certificate, it's great, it's fantastic, something to hang on your wall, but what are you going to do with it? And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I had no idea what to do with it. And he said, Leeds University, they have a lot of pagan students, people interested in metaphysics and magic and philosophy, and and they could quite easily get entangled in things that are not quite kind of okay, things that are inaccurate, or things that are even harmful, harmful groups and so on. And you ought to approach the chaplaincy centre to tell them that, you know, you'd be available. And I thought, I can't do that. He said, yes, you can. So by the end of the evening, all these people in this party, they were all encouraging me to contact Leeds University Chaplaincy Centre. So I spoke to the senior Anglican chaplain, and he said, well, I have to put it to 3 different committees, but it sounds like a really good idea, and I think that it would be very, very valuable. So he said, leave it to me. And sure enough, each of these different committees, they said, yes, I think it would be a really good and valuable addition to have somebody who was advisor on things like occult topics and things, and paganism and druidry and, you know, all sorts of everything. And magic as well, and so forth. So they said, what you need to do now is you need to go to the Occult Society meeting, which is a group called Cabal, and then stand up and tell them what you want to do, and they'll do a vote. Well, I knew all of those people because I'd been going to the Cabal Society for a long time, so they all knew me. And they were all blown away, and they said, "Oh yes, 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 yes." Well, this information, you know, Susan Leybourne, pagan chaplain, Leeds University, it went right round the world. I was sort of internationally famous and notorious overnight. You know, I was condemned by the Archbishop of York, and you know, he spoke about me in his Christmas Day address. You know, so it was. A bit of a whirlwind, and I did this until I moved down to Northamptonshire. But you know, that was quite a journey.
What did that work actually involve? Did it involve personal interactions with individual students as well as organisations?
It did, because through that I had several invitations to speak at universities on theology modules, and the odd thing in women's studies, but mostly theology. And but I also saw students as well, who some were interested in different particular paths, you know, kind of, I want to get into this particular path, but I don't know anything about it. Now, because I had a huge back catalogue of spiritual knowledge, and for do say so myself, you know, very, you know, knowing about the magical systems of these things, I was able to sort of help people and guide them. And I even had people from Thailand and from Malaysia and places like that. We ended up doing kind of swaps as well, you know, kind of, you teach me about Western magic and I'll teach you about, you know, kind of what we do in Malaysia, you know. And so I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. So we had quite a lot of interaction. I had, you know, quite a lot of interactions with students and people who were doing modules, or they had to find out about, because you've got to think that this is the days before, you know, everyone had the internet. And, you know, if you wanted to find out about, you know, kind of, you know, medieval grimoires, or you needed to find out about witchcraft trials in, you know, in Germany in the 1600s or something, you know, you had to search through lots of books to find this information. And sometimes it's sometimes better to speak to someone such as myself, and who could sit you down with a tea or coffee and then say, right, okay, so what are you doing? What's your approach? What do you need to look at? And so that was a way forward, but also the sort of pastoral side as well. You know, I had, you know, one girl that her twin sister had suddenly died. And she didn't really have a kind of a compass of what do I do. And she was on the point of leaving her course and just not continuing because it was just too stressful for her. So pastoral stuff, giving people advice. I had one lad who he became homeless and stayed on my settee for about 2 weeks. So even though that's not part of the role, we'd become friends. So I thought, come and stay at mine. And sort of variety of things along those.
Yeah. So based on that and based on your interactions and your knowledge of the young people at that university at that time, where do you think young people are coming from today in terms of their spiritual interests? Are these as intense, perhaps, as they were in the past? Have they changed? What I think I'm really trying to get at here is that we spend a lot of time here in the Theosophical Society beating our breasts and saying, why can't we attract more young people to what we do or to our talks and everything? What would your advice be?
I mean, there are academic studies, certainly now, in Amsterdam, in Gothenburg, in parts of America, and they've opened a new course, an MA course in Exeter, which is basically about magic and things like that. But, there's Western esotericism, Wutahanagraph's, Major Baby. He's done some fantastic work in Amsterdam, so the people's minds are kind of opening a lot more towards esoteric study. And not just for practitioners, but for the kind of theory, the textual analysis and things like that. So it's becoming a little bit more on the surface that people can actually go to a university and study metaphysics, study occultism, study the history of it, not necessarily the practice of it, but the history of it, and to compare these things with anthropological material, to compare it with, for example, in my field, where I'm looking at Neoplatonic theurgy. Scholarship now is moving very closely towards, well, let's look at what 9th, 10th century tantrics were doing. Let's see if we can, use Tantra as a lens by which we can explore theurgy and get a better handle on what they were doing or what they were trying to do. And in my early research, my perspective was, well, there was a lot of information in Jewish mysticism, in the Hechelot material and Merkaba material and apocalyptic stuff. So we can see that there's some crossovers. So I think that people now, they are searching for information, but unfortunately they go to TikTok, they go to social media, they go to, YouTube and things like that. And I mean, you can find out a lot of interesting things on YouTube, but, to have some 17-year-old person, all in black, with loads of silver. And I'm a witch, and I'm the expert on this. And it's a bit, kind of just add water, stick it in the microwave, and, you will, kind of achieve a huge amount of, knowledge, power, and it's nonsense. So all of this legwork is gone.
It's clear there is and has been a real upsurge of interest in this in academic circles, as you say, in Paris and Amsterdam, currently in Copenhagen, America, and elsewhere. What about those people who are not of an academic persuasion and who are not really comfortable with just doing conventional academic studies? What's the way of reaching them? Is it through TikTok and Instagram and all these other platforms which people of my age don't particularly understand? Or is there another way, do you think?
I think when you try to reach out to people, I think certainly having human contact is a very important thing. A Facebook friend who I don't actually know, but I just know him from Facebook, I met up with him last Saturday. And by the end of the afternoon, he said, "Oh, maybe we should, well, we both decided maybe we should put like a bit of a call out, to form an esoteric sort of discussion group, get people coming together to discuss different aspects of esotericism and mystical practice and things like that. And it would be like, coffee and cake and have it at a local cafe." So, we put out feelers and, very little uptake. Some people that were into it, but they were too far away. And again said, let's do it on Zoom. I think there's importance in human contact because while it's kind of down here, kind of away from I like to sniff people, to feel the energy, of individuals. And I think that sometimes when, if you're listening to a Zoom session, and I've done it myself, that, it might start off there are 30 people on the, participants. And, unless you get their attention early on, you see it dwindling away. And they think, oh, there's a good film on. Oh, right, I want to go make a cup of tea. If you're in a meeting, you can't disappear. You've just got to stick it out and listen. The good bit might be coming later. So I think that the internet, it's a useful ally, but it's also... it can be the enemy of real development because having to go and, find that mentor, sit in that guy's front room, be nervous, so what? You're nervous, go and do it.
It does seem sometimes that there is this disconnect. The Theosophical Society has often been criticised down the years as not doing very much. It's all about lectures. It's very much on the mental plane. Do you think Theosophy should have something else? I mean, should it do things? Should it have more of a ritual or ceremonial aspect, the way that other groups do?
I think if you read Madame Blavatsky's writings, there's a lot of information there about, kind of working with elementals and working with subtle energies, about psychic powers and things like that. And in the early days, I'm kind of, it's not really in the open, but I do think that there must have been some kind of ritual element, some kind of meditative element. And there certainly is in the esoteric sort of section where, there's sort of an emphasis on, kind of mind yoga, Raja yoga, and so on. That, these practices are kind of encouraged, but I think that there's still a need for something more regular. If you go to a lodge meeting, I remember that there used to be a meditation, a statement of the articles of the of society, and a short meditation to bring people into a harmonious vibration. Because this is an important thing, that when people are meditating together, they are in a harmonious vibratory state, that their energies link up so that you don't get arguments and disagreements and discord and so forth. You get more of, we're all together trying to better understand, better to take this information apart, to learn more. So I think even meditation, Westerners are really funny about meditation, that how do I go about it? My own practice is a kind of an emptiness practice, going into a void-like state. I'm not looking for, I'm not going down a leafy lane to meet a guide. I'm just hoping to experience me at my divine self state, that kind of thing, and just kind of dwell. Patanjali, he said this is this certain practices where you are residing in your own essence, and modern mediums have adopted practices like this because they've been kind of reintroduced into for example, into spiritualism, where they say, oh, sitting in the power. We'll do sitting in the power, and you're not looking for any information. An interesting thing, Leadbeater, he had said in his 1911 work, on the inner life, in the second volume, and he talks about, this sort of need for recognizing where you are in your own state. And he refers to this idea of, just because the winds, for example, psychic winds blow the curtain up to one side when I'm sitting in my living room, doesn't mean, and I might see somebody walking by, they're not walking by for me, and I think a lot of people in meditation, they may see a guide, they may see a colour, they may see a dog, they may get, who knows, they might see a tree, and they think, oh, this is some kind of indication of my growth, or what the kind of powers beyond that are trying to kind of guide me towards. And it may not be the case. It hardly ever is the case. It's just that you've got to a certain stage in your meditation, and it's usually in the kind of theta level that you start, your brain starts throwing up all sorts of nonsense.
Can I put something else to you? One of the things that I've felt very much about the Theosophical Society since I was a member was that the third object, exploring hidden forces and the powers latent in human beings or whatever, this has always seemed to me to be one of those objectives that we neglect, and that it provides, these days especially, a real good opportunity to work with more enlightened scientists and people from other professions and everything. And I don't think we do that in the way that perhaps the early days of the Theosophical Society were able to achieve that. Forging greater links with people, certainly in scientific communities, I think would be an excellent thing. What would you feel about that?
Yeah, I would say so. If you look at some of the early works, for example, esoteric chemistry and things like that, the nature of man, and looking at also these various planes of existence. Now, one of my areas of interest has been neuroscience, what the brain is doing during altered states of consciousness, during trance states, during visions, during clairaudience, what part of the brain is working. So I got very, very interested and very excited by your kind of neuroscience and what does it all mean, especially to one's spiritual development and what the brain is doing. Because I was listening to something last night, and it was some philosophical piece to do with Hegel, and even in 1805, Hegel had said things like, the mind is not in the head, it's in some kind of field of consciousness between people. And then I started to think, well, hang on a minute, what if it's just you on your own? Does mind dissolve? But again, the discussion didn't go that way. But this idea of morphogenetic fields and so forth, it's been discussed by philosophers in recent times, but in the last couple of 100 years. But it's something of an important factor that we do take on board, things like fields of consciousness and states of awareness, and even things like kind of these various masters and so forth. That people get very excited about masters and guides and angelic beings and so forth. But where are they in relation to us? Are they a breath away? Are they on a higher, vibratory state, like tuning along the radio band? Where are they? Are they close to us in personality, in structure, and so forth? So I kind of get interested in that kind of thing. And certainly in spiritualism, this idea has gone from like one named guide to a spirit team who may be nameless. And of course, you can have, maybe 5, 10, 15 guides who work with you for a variety of different purposes. So, and I do believe that we do need to look at, kind of higher contacts, higher plane contacts, because all magical groups going back, to, the Golden Dawn, the OTO, the Society of the Inner Light, all of these various groups, they always refer to themselves as being fully contacted groups, fully contacted lodges, and that suggests that it means that they have got guidance from a higher source, whereas a lot of groups now, they might have a book and they'll go by, a set text and things like this, and they'll fumble around in, there may be a kind of a modicum of leadership, but they'll fumble around from one topic to the next, but they're not connected to the source of that power. And certainly, being in an initiatory tradition of a particular order or a particular group is very different from just finding the book of rituals in the local Waterstones or somewhere, taking it home and thinking, right, page 1, I start with this, page 2, I start with that, and I'm going to do this ritual. You will not get the same results unless you are part of that initiatory cycle, because there are certain things that you will not know and that are not in the books. So I think that there's a great need for instruction. There's a great need for understanding what things are referring to. For example, I recently took a course, which was an online course on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And one of the first pieces that we looked at, it referred to the seer. And of course, me interested in, kind of altered states of consciousness, psychic awareness, etc. I had read the seer in reference to the person who is the mystic seer. But no, the tutor explained that the seer is the witness and the witness is the soul. So this is what it's talking about. It's not talking about some mystic power within ourselves. It's talking about the soul as the witness. So that was quite interesting. And the development of the soul. Yes.
Can we just move on to the one thing that also concerns me is, a lot of people who come into these things, we live in very much a me world at the moment, don't we? And people come into these things for personal advantage often. It might be spiritual growth, but they might want other things too. And is it your view that perhaps people's motivation sometimes is a little bit questionable and different perhaps from what it was in the past? Is this something?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's a lot of people who are interested from a kind of power over perspective. I want to control my life. I want to become wealthy or successful. Certainly this new movement, which is to do with manifestation and the law of attraction, it's all material world based.
Yeah.
I want to be wealthy. I want to have a beautiful car and a beautiful wife and a beautiful villa in the south of France and all of these things. And it's kind of intention setting, and it's not helping others. It's all ego based. And if it's all ego based, your evolution is only going to be to a certain degree or a certain level. And this is the problem, because most people, they want to be able to show their friends, look at my diamond bracelet, look at my, my beautiful life, look at my new, air fryer or whatever it might be. So there's a lot of things of kind of show and tell.
Well, this is a form of spiritual paralysis, isn't it? When people get
it is, and really, with true evolution of the spirit and evolution of the soul and evolution of the mind, that there isn't really much of a show and tell, that there isn't anything to, to kind of hold up and say, look, I'm a master of. Well, anyone who says I'm a master of is a charlatan. They're not a master of anything, but they want to be perceived as one, and they're going to ask for money at the end of it. So, the true person is the person who sees something in another, takes them under their wing, and guides them to be as good as, and then better than them themselves. And that was the original idea of mentorship, not these paid things where people spend nearly £2,000 for a few weekends, on a few Zoom courses and things, which that seems to be, what mentorship has become now.
What also means, Susan, sorry to interrupt, but what it also means is that people think that they can get almost instantaneous results. You go on a weekend seminar, you get a certificate at the end of it, you pay whatever you pay, and then that's it. It's almost like taking something out of a tin or a packet, and suddenly, enlightenment. It doesn't work. People are not, I don't think people really are prepared to put in the effort in the way perhaps people did in the past. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it's just because I'm a grumpy old man that I'm saying these things, but I suspect that people expect something for nothing here a lot of the time.
I worked in America in the early 2000s, and there I was in Beverly Hills, and the guy who was hosting me, he said, we ought to set up a group. We ought to, have some sort of, organisation. And I was all for this. I thought this would be nice, it'd be good. And my perspective is to teach people how to be their own God. To teach people how to be not necessarily reliant on what I say or what anyone else says, but to find the power within themselves to supply their own answers. It may be based on things that they've read or things that they've encountered, but things that they've evolved within their own spirit and their own soul. And this man, he said, you can't teach people that. They want to be told. They want to be spoon-fed. And I said, well, why do they want to be spoon-fed? And they said, well, they won't believe it's real otherwise. So I found myself sort of backing out of that. I thought, I don't really want to be a cult leader. I'm kind of explaining, stuff to people and, kind of, fining them, if they fail to get the lesson and things like this, So, I think that people do want instant, kind of just stick it in the microwave or, work to the end of that lesson. And whether they've kind of grasped the material of the lesson, I'm not for lesson 1, lesson 2, I went to my mentor and all the teachings occurred, kind of, with tea and cake in his front room. And, and I'd be there all day. I went every 2 weeks and I'd be there all day and became part of the family. And we'd sometimes go and do some sort of practical work. But generally speaking, all of the philosophical teachings, all of the metaphysical teachings, the occult teachings, they were all based on just sitting and talking. And he said to me, people sometimes they find their way to me and, they get their notepad out because they're expecting lesson 1 and lesson 2 and we're going to do this. And that's not the way it works. That I have to feel the energy of the crowd, feel the energy of the person and decide, kind of feel what to give them. It doesn't matter what you want. It's what your soul needs.
Okay, good. Just to wind things up, you are currently studying for a P, I believe. Can you tell us briefly a little bit about what the thrust of that is and what you've discovered on this particular journey as you've been researching this.
I've discovered a lot of really exciting things. My research is, my title is on the origins, development, and theurgy of the Chaldean oracles. The Chaldean oracles are a very fragmentary text that it doesn't exist like the Nag Hammadi fragments or any of those things, or the things from Qumran. There are no actual fragments. You can't go to a museum and see them pinned up somewhere. They've only survived in the writings of Neoplatonists, pagan Neoplatonists, and also some Christian Neoplatonists. So the material that we're working with, it's very much based on Platonic study, Middle Platonic study, Neo-Pythagoreanism, an element of Stoic ideas, and a practice that we now understand as theurgy, which means God work. And it's basically about allowing the gods to work on us so that we can ascend to a higher realm, a higher level. So, these practices, they're in the text that I'm working from. I've identified 3, possibly 4 different types of theurgy that's been described. But we kind of stuck with this kind of pseudo-mythology of where the text comes from, when it evolved, when it developed, and so on and so forth. And this is kind of replicated still by modern scholars who are working basically with the ideas that developed from 1928 onwards. So, this is one of the issues that modern scholars, they just copy the ideas of their peers and their forebears without looking at the text and without questioning the text and without questioning the history. So I've looked very deeply into the history. I've looked very deeply into the locations, because there are no locations mentioned. But it's basically about the philosophical practices. And we see one important figure is Iamblichus, who was a very important theurgist. And he wrote an important work called On the Mysteries. It's called that now, but originally it got a very long-winded title. It's so-and-so's response to... it's basically responding to someone else's inquiries. Please explain this to me. Mm-hmm. And so, there's a lot of ideas that are regarded as theurgic. But we also see from the kind of Italian Renaissance that there is this sense of, let's look at these things again. As certainly before that, with the writings of Michael Psellus, who was a Byzantine scholar, he looked at these oracles again, and he looked at the work of Proclus. So a forgotten text or a lost text, it's lost to us. And it appears as if he's kind of arguing, please don't get involved in this. It's grubby, don't get involved in it. So, I'm looking at a lot of things that have been accepted previously and now may not have been accepted. It may not be that acceptable. But I'm looking at all sorts of comparative practices that are to do with solar sense. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed, Susan. We'll wind this up there, because I'm sure, as always, there are going to be some questions and comments. So thank you, Susan, for a very wide-ranging discussion. Just to wish you a very good week. Thanks again, Susan. Thanks to you all, and we'll see you again in the future. Bye for now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.